Hi, I'm Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the books that I read from my physical TBR in the months of January and February. So it is now June when I am filming this, so please excuse the lack of detail in these reviews. It has been at least 4 months, in some cases almost 6 months that since I've read these books, and some of the details, especially for the ones that I didn't enjoy so much, have kind of gone from my mind. I've been doing a project this year where I'm trying to read all of the books from my physical TBR that I've owned since before the start of the year. So back at the end of December, I did a sort of clear out of all of my unread physical books, and I got rid of all of the ones that I wasn't in some way interested in reading. So that left me with 60 books. So I'm trying to get through all of them this year, which means that I need to read 5 a month. As I'm filming this, it is the middle of June and I've read all of the books for June, so I'm doing really well. But I do have a lot of longer books left, which is a bit concerning for the end of the year. Some of them are sort of over 1,000 pages, which is not ideal. So I would say that so far, as you'll see in this video, my reading has been a real mixed bag with the books from my physical TBR, and in some cases it's been surprising the books that I've really enjoyed and the books that I've not enjoyed. I think maybe I don't know my own taste as well as I thought I did, so that's been really interesting. I'm going to talk about the books from my favourite to my least favourite. I did try and film this video before, and I sort of went through them in chronological order, but there were quite a lot of books that I didn't enjoy. I DNF'd some books out of this, so I felt like it was all very negative, and I left some of the books that I preferred to the very end, and it sort of run out of steam. So I'm going to start with the books that I loved, and hopefully I can devote some more energy to those. So in January and February I read or DNF'd 14 books. I was really trying to sort of get ahead for the rest of the year, and out of those, I would say that the first three I'm going to talk about I absolutely loved. They're like some of my favourite books I've read this year. And there were 4 books that I really liked, but they're not going to be favourite books. Then there are another 3 that I finished and got some enjoyment out of, but didn't love. And then there are 4 that I DNF'd. So definitely quite a mixed bag. Some of these books I've owned for a very long time and I've not got to for whatever reason. So I wasn't surprised that I didn't like some of them because my taste has changed a lot. Sometimes I will pick up books in secondhand charity shops just because I see them, and I think, oh, I'll get to it at some point, but with no real intention to prioritize it. So yeah, it's not really surprising that some of them I've not enjoyed. So the first book that I read this year, and the biggest success I've had so far, is A Question of Upbringing by Anthony Powell. I had owned this book for so long, like I think maybe 3 years. I heard Katie over at Books and Things talking about this series of books. It's actually a 12 book series. It was written between the early 50s, so this one is the first one, and it was written in 1951, and I think that he finishes off the series in maybe the 70s, and it feels almost autofictional. I don't know if it's meant to be based on his life, but the protagonist in this is around about the same age that he would have been at the time, and he is also a writer, so it makes me think that this is probably based on his personal experience. So in the first book we follow our narrator called Nick Jenkins. Yes, that was right. And he is at school. He goes to a private boarding school. His family are very well off, and there are 4 or 5 chapters in this book, and each chapter is almost like a scene from his life. So there are a couple of bits at school. It talks about his friends. There's also this character called Widmerpool, who he doesn't really like at school. He's a recurring character throughout the books. And then I think in chapter 3 he goes to France for the summer, and it talks about all of the characters he meets there. I have now read up to book 9 in this series, so this was a huge success for me. I absolutely loved it. I love the writing in it. At points it's quite descriptive, but it never feels over the top, and there are so many characters in these books that come in and out. So sometimes you won't have seen a character for 3 books, and then he'll go to a party and they'll be there, and it's maybe a party it's held by someone that he doesn't think knows this other character, and then like, you know, it's sort of a high society type book where he's very well off. He runs in sort of literary circles, and so a lot of the people know each other in ways that you wouldn't expect. So it's really interesting from that point of view, and I would recommend, if you're going to give this series a go, to read them in quite quick succession, because you definitely get a lot out of it when you can remember the characters from the books before, and you're like, oh yeah, that's that person, I forgot about them. Whereas I think if you left it like a year in between each book, you would forget who people are, how they connect. But yeah, I really recommend this one. I think because the books are so short, like each book is around about 250 pages, they're quite easy to get through. I think you can buy them like the first three books in one volume, but for me, I think I'm more likely to pick a book up if it looks shorter. So yeah, I absolutely loved this series. At the point I'm at now, I've had a break for maybe like 6 weeks, just because we got to the point where we were in the Second World War, and I was a bit confused, not confused, but when this was written in the 50s and 60s, the war would have been fresh in everyone's mind, whereas me reading it now, a lot of the sort of abbreviations that everyone would have known back then, like I don't know. So it's taken me a while to work out who's who in terms of ranks and what exactly is going on. But yeah, I'm still really enjoying it, and I'm definitely going to finish the series. I've bought all of them secondhand, so I have them all, and yeah, it's just been a real joy to read these. The next book that was a great success for me is a book that I also have had on my shelves for about 3 years, and that's Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. Obviously everyone's been reading this book this year because it's been made into film with Emma Stone, and Alasdair Gray is a Scottish author. He lived in Glasgow. If you have been to Glasgow, you'll probably recognise his artwork. He's done a lot of murals. There's like a map of the West End of Glasgow in Hillhead subway station that he has done the artwork for. So yeah, he's definitely a very prolific Glaswegian author. He died maybe 10 years ago now, and because he's Scottish, if you go to charity shops, you will find this book everywhere. So I picked it up. I read Lanark before, by Alasdair Gray, which is sort of like epic fantasy type book. Half of it is set in Glasgow, and then the other half is set in this sort of magical land called Unthink. It's not really my type of book, but I did enjoy it. He's such a quirky writer, but I had a feeling this might be similar, but it's like absolutely nothing like it. I guess it's also quirky, so it's got that in common, but apart from that, they're completely different books. Probably you'll know what this is about since the film has been so popular. It's a story about Bella Baxter, who is pregnant and is found dead in a river in Glasgow, and this sort of mad scientist takes her, and he takes the baby out of her stomach and removes her brain and puts the baby's brain into the adult body. So she looks like an adult, but she has the brain of a child, and it goes on from there. This book is very interesting in the way it plays with form. There are a lot of letters, there are a lot of things from different people's perspectives, and you are left not sure who to believe. I think that I read this before I watched the film, which I would definitely recommend because they're both the same story, but they're very different, and I think that I got different things out of both of them. One thing I really loved about this book is it's sort of set in the Victorian period in Glasgow, and I'm like from Glasgow originally, and so I went to university in Glasgow. I know all of the streets really well, and so being able to picture in my head where the characters were at all times was a really good experience for me. I think if you live in London, you probably get this quite a lot because there are a lot of books set in London, but I don't think I've really read something that's set in Glasgow where I knew every single street. I knew exactly, like I could picture everything in my head, so it was really cool. And yeah, this poses a lot of interesting questions. It's sort of a take on Frankenstein. It's also a very feminist book, and it's just unlike any book I've ever read, and it was just a really fun reading experience as well. I tend to read a lot more serious books, so something that still was asking questions but in a more light-hearted way, I really enjoyed. So if you've not read this, I would definitely recommend picking it up. Yeah, it was amazing. And the third book in the category of books I absolutely loved was The Eighth Life by Nino Haratischwili. I think that's how you say it, I might be completely wrong. And this was translated from the German by Charlotte Collins. But it's a Georgian book. The author, I believe, is Georgian, but moved to Germany, so writes in German. This book was longlisted, I think, for the International Booker maybe 2020. I have here that it was written in 2014, but I think that was in German. I think it was translated into English in 2020. This is a massive book, which is why it took me so long to get to it. I bought this like quite a few years ago, probably just after it was long listed for the Booker in a charity shop, and then I just didn't get to it because I knew I was going to like it, but it was just so long. But yeah, I had a really good reading experience with this. I read it in quite short chunks. I tried to split it up over the whole month of February, so I read like 30 pages a day. It's like a 900-page book. And that was a really good way for me to read it, because at no point did I feel like, oh god, I've still got 600 pages to go, because I was just reading my section for the day, and then I wasn't thinking about how much I still had to read. This is a sort of Georgian family saga. When I heard people talk about it before, they said that it was about a chocolate maker's family, which it is, but I'd say that the chocolate making is a very, very small aspect of it. So if you're going to pick it up, don't pick it up based on that, because that's not really a big aspect of the book. This sort of follows 4 generations of a family from about the Russian Revolution up until I think 2009 is the latest section. It follows sort of the narrator's great grandmother, then her grandfather, then her mother, and then her, and then it's about her niece. So yeah, it definitely spans a huge period of time, but because it's so long, you really get time to spend with the characters. Like, I felt like I knew them all very well. It's quite harrowing. As you can imagine, it follows World War II, it follows the Soviet occupation of Georgia, and the USSR. There are some horrible things that happen in this, but the characters were so well fleshed out. There were some morally grey characters in it, especially the grandfather. Some of the things he does you really disagree with. But yeah, I think if you like really well written, detailed family sagas, maybe about, I didn't know much about Georgia, so maybe if you don't know much about Georgia, this is a great way to get to learn about a country, well, without it feeling too expositional. Yeah, I really love this. Would recommend. I see that they have a new book out. I can't remember what it's called. It looks a lot shorter, so I am quite interested to pick it up at some point, and we will see. Then on to the books that I liked but didn't absolutely love. The first one is The Rehearsal by Eleanor Catton. This is her first book, so I have read her 2 subsequent books. I read The Luminaries, which won the Booker Prize in I think 2013, and I absolutely loved it. It's she's from New Zealand, so this is a book. It's like a historical fiction set in New Zealand. And then I read Birnam last year, which just came out last year, which is more of like an eco thriller, also set in New Zealand. And I liked it. I didn't love it as much as The Luminaries. I would say that this, for me, is sort of in the middle of those books in terms of enjoyment. I'd say that I probably liked it a bit more than Birnam, but nowhere near as much as The Luminaries. But all 3 of her books are completely different. So, like, if you've liked The Luminaries or Birnam, I wouldn't necessarily say that you would definitely enjoy this. They're very different. So this book was written in 2008, so I think she was quite young when this came out, because I think she was only like 25 when she won the Booker in 2013, so I think she must have been about 20 when she wrote this. And this is a book, it's really quite hard to explain. It has sort of 2 separate timelines in it. So part of it is talking about this music teacher who is like a private tutor for girls learning, I think, the saxophone, or maybe singing, not sure now. And it's about one of those pupils whose elder sister has had a sexual relationship with one of the teachers at school. And then there's a second section that is about this boy who's just starting acting school, and they start to put on a play about this girl that they've read about in the newspaper who's had a sexual relationship with a teacher, so it's meant to be the same girl. He then meets the the sister of this girl, and they start a sort of relationship. But it's a very bizarre book because the sections about the boy at the acting school are told in months. So the title of each chapter, it says October, November, December, and then the ones about the music teacher are told in days. So it'll say like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at the start of each chapter. So you're not sure how the stories are intersecting. It's definitely playing with time in a very interesting way. I'd say that you're not really given any clear answers, but the whole time I was reading this, I was like trying to work out what was going on. So now that I've read the story, I'm tempted to go back and try and reread it and see if I can make some sense of what you're meant to take from it. But it definitely brought up a lot of interesting questions about consent, about if you have the right to tell someone else's story in that way. You know, the acting school just take this story about sexual assault and make it into a play, but they don't know the girl, they've not asked if that's okay. It was a really interesting book, and I would definitely recommend picking it up. And I did really enjoy it, but it's not one that's going to be like a favourite book of the year. Next, I read Stillborn by Guadeloupe Nettel, translated from the Spanish by Rosalind Harvey, I think. Yes, by Rosalind Harvey. And this book came out in, I think, last year, 2023. It was shortlisted for the International Booker, and I had a voucher to spend in a bookshop in Edinburgh that I had to use before I moved house, maybe in April time last year, so I guess I bought it then, and then I just never picked it up. I really liked this book, but it was quite a difficult read. It's, as the title would suggest, it deals with two friends. One of the women doesn't want to have a baby, the other one does, but there are complications in her pregnancy. And the woman that doesn't want to have a baby then sort of starts this friendship with a boy that lives in her building who's maybe 8 or 9, and it's almost like she's becoming a mother to him. So it definitely deals with motherhood. I think if you're interested in books about motherhood, this is a really good one to pick up. It definitely poses a lot of questions about what being a mother means, what duty of care is. I found it quite difficult to read at points. There are a lot of medical complications with the mother who does have a child, that I find those sort of things quite stress inducing to read about. I thought the writing was good, but it was quite simple. There wasn't anything particularly special about it. And I did enjoy it, but it has now been 3-4 months since I read it. It's not stuck with me hugely. I don't necessarily love books about motherhood, so that's maybe more of a personal thing to me. I've heard lots of people really rave about this book, so if it does sound like something that's of interest to you, I would recommend picking it up. I did like it, it's not going to be a favourite book for me. Next, I read Persuasian by Jane Austen. I don't really like a copy of this book that I bought. It's a very slim one, Persuasion. This will be my 5th out of the 6 sort of completed Jane Austen novels, and it wasn't one of my favourites, but I love Jane Austen, so it's still an excellent book. But I would say that my favourite Jane Austens are definitely Emma and Mansfield Park, followed probably by Pride and Prejudice, then this, then Northanger Abbey. This is a more sort of pensive, sadder book for Jane Austen. There's still a lot of excellent social commentary and funny characters, but this is a book about Anne Elliot, who was in love maybe 8 years ago, I think, with Captain Wentworth. She wanted to get engaged to him, but she sort of listened to her family, who thought that he wasn't good enough for her, and he's gone away, and she's now heard that he's back in town. You can sort of imagine where it goes from there. So it's not really a story about a new love, it's a story about rekindling a love. I did really like it. I do love Jane Austen's writing, but for me, it didn't have the same spark as some of the other books that I've read. So yeah, still a solid read. I will reread it at some point. I think once I've finished all of Jane Austen's books, I will go back and do a reread of them all. So we'll see how it stands up in that. Then I read This Earth of Mankind by Pramoedya and Ananta Toer. I'm really sorry, I've probably absolutely butchered that. This was translated from the Indonesian by Max Lane, and this book first came out in 1980, so it's sort of like a modern classic now. This is the first in a quartet of books. It's called the Buru Quartet, and I picked this up maybe a couple of years ago because I really like the cover, like it is beautiful, and I've never really read any Indonesian literature, more specifically Javanese. He's from the island of Java in Indonesia, and I thought, yeah, it's part of the world I've not read much from, so I was really interested to pick it up. It's also quite interesting because the author spent quite a lot of time in jail for sort of political dissidence, I think, and he wrote this book orally when he was in prison, so that's quite interesting. I did like this book quite a lot. It's dealing with the Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia, and a lot of it is about the caste system, how he's treated as what they call like a native, and the sort of disadvantages he has due to that. There is a lot of discussion about class in this, and I think probably it would be beneficial to do a little bit of reading about the Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia before picking it up, because it took me about 50 pages to work out exactly who is who. They talk about Europeans, they talk about natives, they talk about there's other terminology to sort of describe the different caste systems. But yes, in this book, our narrator is a sort of native boy who goes to a school where he is the only full native, essentially. So it's sort of about how he's treated there. He then meets a young girl whose mother is native, but her father is European, so she's like mixed, and he falls in love with her. That was the bit that I wasn't sure about. This was like quite a lot of it was a sort of love story. The girl is very young. I think she's about 14. And the way he talks about her, I found a bit strange at points. Like, he really seems to think that she's the most beautiful thing in the world, which is fine. It just went on a lot like that. There was an awful lot of description of that, which is okay, but yeah, I was just getting a bit tired of it. I'm interested to see where this goes. You know, it is sort of left on not a cliffhanger as such, but I think the next 3 books in the quartet are going to follow on directly from it. So I would be interested in picking them up. I've not, as I said, I hadn't read anything from this part of the world, and I didn't know much about Dutch colonial rules, so it was really eye-opening for that. The writing was okay. It was nothing like amazingly special, but this was like a perfectly solid read. There were just bits of it that I think maybe just haven't aged well, essentially. Then 3 books that I finished, but I wouldn't particularly recommend, didn't really like them very much. The first is The Waiting Years by Fumiko Enchi. This is translated from the Japanese by John Bester. This is a book from 1957. So yeah, it's sort of a modern classic, and I have now donated this one to charity. I'm not going to reread it, I don't think. It's a very short book. It's about 120 pages, and sometimes I struggle with short books. I just find it quite difficult to get into them. I find that the story's sort of finished before I've been able to invest any energy into the characters. And this book is it's about a married couple. They're very well off, and the woman goes to find essentially a maid slash concubine for her husband. That's the first chapter, and that chapter was really good. I was really interested to see where it was going to go, but between each chapter there's quite a big time jump and a sort of character jump. So we get to the second chapter and it's years later, and the concubine's already sort of settled in, and they're going to look for a new maid. So each chapter I felt like I was missing the juicy part of the story, if you know what I mean. It was like setting it up and then it was jumping on in time. it was quite a sad book. I did feel sorry for the wife, and then you go on to feel sorry for the concubine. This book was, yeah, just maybe not for me. I just found the pacing a little bit odd. I didn't really get that invested in any of the characters, and yeah, not one I'm going to reread. Then I did a bit of a silly thing, and I had already owned a portrait of the artist as a young man by James Joyce, but then I also went on and bought Ulysses before I read this, and then when I read it I didn't really like it that much, so now I'm a bit dubious about Ulysses, but I will get to it. It is on my shelf. This book. So also, firstly, this cover is ridiculous. I don't know. This is a Penguin edition, but I don't know if you can see, but it says a truly extraordinary novel by Ewan McGregor. Like, why has Ewan McGregor blurbed James Joyce? I don't think that James Joyce needs his approval. So I just found that quite funny. This so it's a classic. It was written in 1916. James Joyce is probably the most famous Irish writer. To start with, I really was enjoying this book. It's like he's a modernist writer, so the writing style is quite interesting. It's hard to follow what's going on at points. It follows a young boy growing up, and to start with, he's at boarding school. He's sort of getting bullied. He's not really fitting in, and there's a lot of like existential worry type thing going on in his head. It goes on to talk about his family, about the sort of politics in Ireland at that time. All of that I found really interesting. I'd say until about the halfway point, I was really enjoying it, and then it just lost me. It went into a lot of religious conversation about he wasn't sure if he wanted to become a priest. There were a lot of sort of quotes from the Bible picked out, and he was dissecting them. And then towards the end, it goes on, and there's a lot of like Latin and Greek, and the sort of classical studies he's doing at school are picked out and dissected, and it just went right over my head. I don't have much Bible knowledge. My knowledge of Latin and Greek is very minimal, and this felt a bit pretentious. And yeah, I just sort of lost interest in it. However, I am interested to try Ulysses. I think it's going to be more pretentious, but I think my problem with this is because the first half I was quite enjoying, I was finding it quite easy to get through, that then the second half sort of threw me. Whereas I think if I go into Ulysses knowing that it's going to be pretentious and I'm going to find it difficult, then I can take the time to really figure out what's going on. So this was a mistake partly on my part. I'm just not sure that James Joyce is going to be a writer for me, but yeah, we will see. And then the last book out of the books that I finished is A Girl Returned by Donatella di Pietrantonio. Yeah, I think that's right. This is a book that was translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein, and I thought I was really going to like this. It's a Europa edition book. I think they publish all of Elena Ferrante's work, and Goldstein translates Elena Ferrante's work, so I was expecting it to be similar, which is, yeah, maybe a bit stupid because all that they really have in common is the translator, the fact that it's Italian, and the publisher. So yeah, not really similar at all. This is a book about a young girl who is living with her aunt and uncle at the start, but I think that she thinks that they're her real parents, and she finds out that they're not her real parents, and that her aunt and uncle are giving her back to her real parents. When she goes back to her biological family, they live quite a different lifestyle to what she was used to. She was quite well off, and she has quite a lot of siblings. They all sort of struggle to make ends meet. So she's sort of dealing with that, and she's also sort of struggling to understand why she's been given back. This book, there was a bit about it. There was a bit of it that was sort of went a bit incestual. I really don't like that in books. That's one of the things that's like an absolute no-go for me. In books, it holds no interest. I find it a sort of bizarre plot point. And then yeah, the writing style, it was okay. It was a very forgettable book for me. I took very little from it, And yeah, I've already given this one away. It's not one that I will ever want to reread, I don't think. Sorry if I've moved a bit, I've like completely lost feeling in one of my legs, so I've had to change position. So I'm just going to then quickly discuss some of the books that I DNF'd. So yeah, I DNF'd 4 books. I have been being quite generous with myself, and if I don't like any of these books, I've just been DNFing them. I just wanted to give them all a try before I got rid of them for good. So yeah, I was fully expecting that I would DNF some. I'd say that 2 out of the 4 that I DNF'd I thought I might. The other 2 were more of a surprise. So the first one was Soul Mountain by Xingjian. I'm probably butchering that as well. Translated from the Mandarin, I think, by Mabel Lee. Xingjian won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I don't know when, maybe back in the 80s, 90s. And I had this book in my shelf for so long. I tried to read it before and didn't. I'd sort of read maybe about 20 pages and put it back down. It's about a 500-page book, and I read 250 pages of this before DNFing it, which in hindsight was a mistake. This is a book about, it's got 2 sort of perspectives, so each chapter switches narrator, but they were both very similar narrators. In one of the chapters, he's saying it's written in the first person, and in the other chapter, it's written in the second person, I think. So I don't know if you're meant to think that it's the same person just at different times, but both of the perspectives seemed very similar, and similar things were happening in both. So it's basically this narrator who's going on a sort of journey through China. You're not really sure the purpose. He's going to sort of small villages, he's having conversations with people, and then he's moving on. At one point he develops a relationship with a woman and they travel together for a bit. They stay at some people's houses. There's sort of a discussion of Chinese folklore. It's quite hard to figure out which bits of the story are actually happening and which bits are sort of dreamlike. I thought that, like, when I started reading this, I was quite enjoying it, but there were a lot of, like, it's not really a linear story. Like, a chapter ends, and then the next time that it like comes back to the same narrator, he's moved on. So at one point, he's like in a sort of forest, and he's talking to this person that's doing a conservation project, and that was quite interesting. But then in the next chapter he'd moved on and he was elsewhere having a discussion with someone else. I think that this book has maybe got a little bit lost in translation because I have no knowledge of Chinese culture really. That maybe some of the imagery is, like, if you were Chinese you would get more from it. I imagine it's very difficult to translate from Chinese. It's just a very different culture. They have different mythology. I got not very much from this. I kept thinking that it was going to change and that it was going to make sense, and it just wasn't. I started to flick through to the end and it seemed like it was just a continuation of more of the same, and yeah, I was just like, life's too short for this. So I DNF'd that one. I DNF'd Happy Hour by Marlow Granados. I thought I was going to DNF this one. I picked this up second hand on a whim last year when I was in a bit of a reading slump and I wanted something that was going to be a nice sort of like easy read. It's not really my sort of book. It's about 2 young sort of 20-year-olds girls living in New York for the summer, and they're having a fun time. They're sort of going out, going to parties, sleeping with men. It's got a lot of sort of like one-liners. It's meant to be sort of like cool girl book. It's not really my sort of book. I don't really find books like that particularly interesting. I read about 40 pages and I was like, nah, this is definitely not for me. So that was that. And one that I'm quite sad that I DNF'd is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I've had this book on my TBR for ages and I really thought I was going to love it, but I think I didn't realise that it was reading anyway as a children's book. I read the first few chapters and I just really didn't like the tone. It was just, the characters were reading as like characters from children's books. I think this is one of these ones where maybe I'm just too old for it now. I've sort of missed the time that was best to read it for me. But tell me if I'm wrong, because I would like to give this one another go. It's like a 500-page book, and yeah, I wasn't enjoying it, so I just put it down, and I can always pick it up again in the future if it is one that I fancy. The last one I'm quite sad about, because I really thought this was, like, out of all of the books on my physical TBR, I was pretty sure that this was going to be one of like my favourites, and that's In Memory of Memory by Maria Stepanova. This is translated from the Russian by Sasha Dugdale. This is another one that was shortlisted for the International Booker. This was shortlisted maybe in 2021, and I think I picked it up brand new then. And this is sort of, it's a book about memory, but it's maybe more of an academic look at memory. On the back it says that the author's aunt has died. She goes to her house to clear out all of her sort of possessions, but like memories, artifacts, photos, stuff like that, and she starts to look through it and sort of is cataloguing it and thinking about memory. That all sounded really interesting, but I guess there were bits of this. I thought it was going to go in more depth into her family history, whereas what it really was just her philosophizing on memory, and like at points she spends a whole chapter describing a photo, but like she never gives us very much detail about her family, so I didn't really have the interest in what she was talking about. So when she's describing a whole photo, I'm like, okay, that's fine, but like I don't know the people that are in it. I gave up on this one maybe about 150 pages in. I just got to the point where I was like, every time I tried to read it, my mind was just wandering, which is never a good sign. And yeah, I put it down. But if it does get better, please do let me know. This is one that I would consider picking up again. I was so sure I was going to love it, so maybe I just wasn't smart enough for it. Yes, those are all of the books that I read from my physical TBR in January and February. I'm going to do another one for March and April. I'd say that it's been, yeah, quite a mixed bag. I know that a lot of it sounds quite negative, but the three books that I like absolutely loved are definitely like favourite books. Some of them of all time, or definitely of the year, and I'd say the same for March and April. I read some really great books, and also DNF'd a few, didn't like a few. So it has been a really interesting project, just to see which of the books that I've kept for years I actually like. It's been quite surprising at points. If you'd like to hear more about that, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.